Director Renny Harlin officially brings the Nightmare franchise into the MTV generation by upping the pop/rock song quotient and relying on a fresh, kinetic editing style. Harlin was nothing more than a homeless up-and-comer at the time, but would go on to direct an eclectic list of action films from the tremendously successful Cliffhanger to the infamously over-budgeted flop Cutthroat Island. He was also married to actress Gina Davis for a few years. She was a frequent collaborator of his, including the Shane Black scripted The Long Kiss Goodnight with Samuel L. Jackson. This film picks up where the third installment, Dream Warriors, leaves off, with the three of the original characters returning. Actor-wise, they were able to get everybody back except for Patricia Arquette, who declined the producer's offer to return. I believe that this is what inspired their decision to kill off her character and replace her with a new heroine named Alice. Alice's story would continue in Part 5. This decision also mirrors the Janet Leigh-inspired demise of Tina in the original A Nightmare on Elm Street. The Dream Master features some of the most impressive practical effects in the series, most of which were made up on the fly. There is a particularly memorable Roach Motel sequence that was handled by weirdo effects genius Screaming Mad George. I have to say, there is some jarring ADR in Part 4 and 5 of this series. It's either due to poor sound control on the set or a stylistic choice. I did notice that some of the scenes were obviously shot with long lenses, but I can't really be sure why so many of the actors' dialogue was replaced in post. Depending on your opinion, you will either see this effect as subpar or amateurish, or aesthetically pleasing given the dreamlike nature of the plot of each film. A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child. You can think of this installment as the pro-life nightmare. Screenwriter Leslie Boehm certainly doesn't hide her views on the topic. The plot involves Freddy Krueger invading the dreams of an unborn fetus as a way to possess and manipulate his way back into existence. You know, as you do. This leads to scenes where our pregnant heroine Alice has conversations with the physical manifestation of her unborn son. His name is Jacob. We are to assume that his name was always Jacob, since she had yet to pick a name for her baby prior to meeting him. Her unborn fetus is portrayed as a fully drawn character with thoughts, fears, and motivations. Not too subtle in my opinion. Boehm even injects a bit of factual info into her script that I was previously unaware of. It involves the dream habits of unborn fetuses. Apparently, scientists have found that the fetus spends most of its time in a dream state, making this the perfect premise for an Elm Street flick. Although the film does leave out the specifics of this not occurring until the 7th month, and we are never quite clear what trimester Alice is in during the course of the film. As always, there are some pretty inventive nightmare sequences on display featuring state-of-the-art practical effects. Dream Child actually features my favorite nightmare of the entire series, where one of Alice's friends, Greta, eats herself to death. This is all carried out by Freddy's hand, of course. It's Greta's bulimia personified in classic nightmare form. The entire sequence from Greta being force-fed to an entire table of her abusive mother's friends laughing belligerently at her suffering is extremely effective, especially for those who can relate to such illnesses. Stephen Hopkins was a proper visual fit for the series. Freddy is in full-on ham mode here. The excessiveness of his cartoonish demeanor and gratuitous one-liners had been on the incline since Dream Warriors. At the end of the film, you might notice that the film's elaborate M.C. Escher display was most certainly lifted from the climax of Jim Henson's 1986 film Labyrinth. A side-by-side comparison of the two would prove this accusation undeniable. This is definitely the first pure comedy of the Nightmare series. It's a dark cartoon, really. Unsurprisingly, it is also the first film directed by John Waters' collaborator, Rachel Talalay, who had been working behind the scenes on the Nightmare films for almost a decade. Freddy's Gone has a kooky energy that Talalay would bring into her 1995 feature, Tank Girl. The film also has a solid early 90s rock soundtrack. Motion picture soundtracks were of peak importance in the 90s. They even got Alice Cooper to cameo in the film. While Alice Cooper never recorded a song for the Nightmare on Elm Street films, he did do a song for Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives, which practically makes him part of the family. The acting is improved upon from the previous entries. This is achieved by making sure that the dialogue is synced up properly. No more unnecessary ADR here, and that the performances are delivered in a much more naturalistic style, for the most part anyway. Leslie Dean's character plays like a reject from parts 3 through 5. Her tough girl persona is overly manufactured and laughable at times. Freddy must have went to clown college somewhere between part 5 and this movie, because he gives off major bozo energy here. Perhaps they could have called the film Big Top Freddy instead. This would have definitely been more appropriate since Freddy never really stays gone, does he? But then again, as they say, don't hate the player, hate the game. Wes Craven's New Nightmare was an early example of cinematic meta existing in the horror landscape. It was also as good an excuse as any for Wes Craven to get together with his buddies and play exaggerated versions of themselves. This was Craven's return to the genre, a borderline apologetic comeback, seeking amends for his allowing of the Nightmare franchise to sink as low as it did. And also an apology for his allegiance to Meryl Streep and his vow to never touch horror again. Like the best of Wes Craven's writer-director efforts, New Nightmare is an intellectual film full of ambitious ideas rooted in a mix of truth and anecdotal science. You can tell that the cast is getting a kick out of playing dual roles and examining their industry personas in a satirical manner. But perhaps the film could have gone even further in taking the piss out of Hollywood. Unfortunately, we would have to wait until 2000's Scream 3 for Wes to tackle that whale of a subject. The film aims to be creepier and scarier than its predecessors, and on this front, it basically is successful. Although, this incarnation does suffer from being one of Craven's least rewatchable films. Perhaps an effect of its more dour tone and dark subject matter, or the fact that it was never trying to be a fun romp. Besides, that's what we have Scream for. Ronnie Yu attempts to reconjure that wacky Bride of Chucky magic while bringing much-needed closure to the age-old question, who would win in a fight between X and Y movie maniacs, though? The playing field is often uneven in these types of films, given the writer's tendency to make one of them the less bad guy. Said role would be filled by Jason in this film, and the Predator in Alien vs. Predator. Freddy vs. Jason is more of an Elm Street film than the Friday the 13th film, so right off the bat, Jason is treated like a bit of a chump. Not to mention the fact that they cast an actor equal to Robert Englund's height, so it wouldn't look awkward when the two foes were standing in the same shot together. This is very silly thinking, and it cost Kane Hodder a great job with a hefty paycheck. The best thing about the film is that it exists. Even though the form which it exists may be flawed, the fans still got something. And yeah, it may not have Ash Williams and Freddy's makeup may be super weak sauce, but something is better than nothing. It is, however, a shame that this film wasn't the epic horror masterpiece that every horror fan was yearning for. But one thing's for sure, Fred vs. JJ does exist as a final goodbye to a bygone era, an extremely 2003 ode to the 1980s slasher craze. Not the deep cuts or the grimy film trash, but the mainstream horror which spawned multiple kick-ass metal songs, subpar TV shows, and a surplus of killer merchandise.